I love Pokemon, but sometimes you get burnt out and you kinda just want to enjoy it sparingly. But it can easily suck you right back into its vortex. Usually when this happens, you either play your favorite game in this series, or you go back to one you haven't played in a while that you might have been thinking about. But Pokemon has been around for 3 decades now. This series is older than like half of you watching this. But in moments like this, where you're looking at this series as a whole and realize there are definitely some entries you might not really like all that much. And boy, does this fandom love to let you know that they think a particular entry or generation ruined this series forever. Let me give you some examples.
Who are these new Pokemon? What the heck is Chikorita? That is not Bulbasaur. None of these Pokemon are as cool as the original 151. And why isn't the champion my rival? Weak.
No day, night mechanics, or aesthetics in Ruby and Sapphire? No days of the week? You can't trade from Gen 1 and 2 either? Pokemon is literally cooked forever. Bring back the Game Boy Color era.
Why are the health bars so slow? Why is everything so slow? And why does the male trainer look like such a cornball? And there's like a god Pokemon now? They are running out of ideas. Time to pack it up, boys. An ice cream cone Pokemon? Seriously? And what are these moving sprites? Wait, I can't use Pokemon from other regions? Are you freaking kidding me? I gotta fight with this Chandelure-looking thing? And the fire starter? Another firefighting type? That's it. Pokemon is officially ruined forever.
This sort of complaining has been a thing forever, and the collective consciousness of what are the good and bad entries in this series changes over time. Gen 2 was seen as the best pretty often for a long time. Now, Gen 2 is fundamentally broken as a video game because you can't catch Houndour until the post-game, or because Claire's level curve turns an easy game into a potential skill issue. Or maybe you're still living in 2011 and Gen 5 is a war crime for not having your favorite Kanto Pokemon. Well, X and Y must have been a nice band-aid for you. Huh. Alright, I'm being passive-aggressive and tongue-in-cheek here, but I can't help it. I'm a PokeTuber after all. And more importantly, I'm a lifelong fan. It's not just YouTube comments. You guys are usually pretty chill on my channel. But like, have you ever seen a forum post and remember it like 20 years later because it made you cringe so bad? I feel like I get a lot of those moments when I think of the reception of certain games in the series, especially Generation 5. I know, I was one of those people. That whole early to mid 2010s era of Pokemon reception may deserve its own video at some point. But this video isn't about the ever-changing discourse, it's about personally trying to figure out what truly could be considered the worst game in the series. But I do think it's tough to talk about this without bringing up common discourse first, since it often drives the conversation. So we decided to ask in a community post what you guys thought were the worst Pokemon games. And I'm glad I did, since it did remind me of why some people don't connect with certain games in this series. I also did a post for spin-offs, which is gonna be a little harder to nail down as I've never played every spin-off game. And of course, there's a lot of them. Let's just start with the mainline games. For Red and Blue, it's mostly just the lack of features and quality of life stuff. Yeah, there's bugs, but it's mostly the former to me that sticks out. We can talk about the typing balance, but I think the real issues that stick out for me when actually playing the game from start to finish are the little things like the item space and management. The worst though? In terms of legacy, definitely not. These were great, ambitious games at the time. Today, well, it definitely shows its age next to literally any game that came after it. Enough for younger fans to say the game was a disaster, as if they were critically panned in 1998 or something. The Gen 1 games are still pretty easy to get into. Anyway, I don't think most people are pining for me to pick Red, Blue, and Yellow as the worst mainline Pokemon game ever, but I get it if Gen 1 is at your bottom. It's old. I really can't be bothered to really get in the detail for Gens 2 and 3 because I can't convince myself they're good candidates for the worst. most people aren't clamoring for Gen 4 to be a candidate for the worst either. But I will point out the original Diamond and Pearl games for making a generation with pacing issues even slower. Even the surfing mechanic is weirdly sluggish compared to Platinum. So those pre-Platinum versions of Sinnoh could be seen as some of the more expendable games. And I guess if you want to talk about remakes, Fire Red and Leaf Green are generally, at worst, good Pokemon games. Ironically, as excellent I personally think the Johto remakes are, the level curve might be more of a wall in that one depending on your team, since the AI is also smarter. Whereas in Gen 2, the parts of the level curve where you're out-leveled feel more intentional. For as much as Gen 5 glazing has been quite the trend in recent years, myself included by the way, once again, it's actually still got its fair bit of haters. They're just not as vocal as they used to be. I don't think at any point though, I would have considered Black and White or Black and White 2 to be anywhere near the bottom though. I guess a dishonorable mention for some competitive aspects, though I still think it's funny they made my boy Politoed super viable because of the Weather Wars. Personally, I like Gen 5 competitive more than some of the later stuff. But I have to acknowledge, it's the one big stain on Gen 5 for a lot of people that still play older gens competitively. So if you're like a big Showdown player, maybe Gen 5 is your bottom pick. Gen 6 is where more people may relate to people to feeling like it's the worst. Specifically, X and Y, because Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire are generally harmless. X and Y clearly had more cuts to its story and in-game content than usual for a mainline game, and it was also insanely easy. Megas ended being an awesome mechanic, but added little for your in-game playthrough in terms of substance. It just made you more overpowered compared to everyone else. But the worst? I do think once the main games got 3D, it loses something. But I don't know. X and Y is frustrating for its lack of substantial content in several areas, but it's not really offensive to me. The new mechanics were so fun for online battling too, which is something I have to factor. What about Pokemon Sun and Moon? I think those are good, and have more to offer in single player, but some people just can't stand them. The combination of hand-holding and long cutscenes is definitely something that makes it hard to go back to compared to like Gen 1 or Gen 3 simpler pacing. Mechanically, it's still good though. Z-moves are pretty forgettable though. But Gen 7 was mentioned like a lot in my post, and a lot of you guys really don't like it. And I'm surprised there are this many fans that would list Gen 7 as the worst. I kind of get it with the Ultra games, because those were always an uphill battle being a reimagination of a game we just played. Even if you love Pokemon Sun and Moon, nobody was asking for this at the time. But again, the worst? Maybe a bit of a commitment to go back to, but I don't know. There's also Let's Go, but it's one of those weird games that is a mainline game, but not quite a mainline game. It feels so separate, and it kind of works as intended. But unfortunately, it was another case of being a game nobody really asked for at the time. And now, Gen 8. Based on the results of my post, you guys really hate Gen 8. I also do not like Gen 8 very much. I'm willing to defend the devs for their struggles in working on a series that keeps getting bigger, but the end result, that was Sword and Shield, was pretty bland to me. Like, the National Dex stuff sucks, sure, but when looking at the game as objectively as possible, it's not even close to the biggest issue the game has. Gigantamax, while a fun little novelty at first, just wasn't as cool as Megas, and it wouldn't even stick around on the competitive side. So even on that end, it felt compromised in its identity in several ways. Not everything specific to this game is bad, and it's still a decent game in a vacuum. But as a follow-up to Gen 7, this was not it. Gen 7 is not my favorite or whatever, but man, this felt like a big fall off for me. But the question is it the worst Pokemon game? No. According to you guys at least, the worst games are BDSP. It's been a couple of years, and people still are in awe of BDSP's mediocrity. I think a lot of fans were already cautious when it was revealed, myself included. Sinnoh has a lot of cool human designs, at least in my opinion, and something about the way the game looked really turned people off real quick. It was a missed opportunity for a remake, even just in terms of art direction. Now, I'm gonna skip Scarlet and Violet here, because not only are they still technically the newest games, but God, BDSP really does take the cake for me too. At least for mainline games. If it weren't a remake, and it was our first time seeing some of this, we'd definitely be at least a little more warm to it. After all, it's just a Gen 8 version of the Sinnoh games. That is, Diamond and Pearl, not Platinum. You know, the third version that was probably the biggest upgrade a third version ever provided. It didn't even carry over any of the interesting story concepts Platinum used. Not to mention, some of these serious scenes in this chibi style are ridiculous. It's one thing in the DS style, but this? Cyrus looks ridiculous. Even more so when some of these field models just look like they were upscaled from the Wii. Is it the worst on a technical level? That's debatable, but it's optically terrible. Like, people would have preferred no remake if it was going to be like this, and that's not an exaggeration. Ask Gen 5 fans. They'd rather have no Unova remake if it's going to be anything like this. And I'm with them. In fact, totally at peace with it. Get your dev schedules worked out a bit before causing more bad will with remakes. Artistically speaking, BDSP has no reason to exist, and provides no new substance or artistic value that the original games didn't already do better. But I can't call it an inherently bad game. I don't think there's a single mainline game that's like outright bad as a video game or product or whatever. Don't get me wrong, feel free to call BDSP a bad game or whatever to prove a point and ask for something better. But even those games are still rooted in being a functional creature collecting turn-based RPG. The core of Pokemon is still pretty much the same, and the core of Pokemon is timeless. It's just the pieces around it that feel so off in that game. But the consistency, for better or worse, has prevented Pokemon from having something like a full-on Sonic 06 type of game where even core gameplay elements are troublesome regardless of framerate issues. And that's why I think if you're looking for the worst game, truly the worst Pokemon game ever, you gotta look beyond the mainline series. The biggest problem, though, is a lot of the worst games are mostly meant to appeal to a really young audience rather than a broader one like the main games. And then there's stuff like Pokemon Channel, which aren't really normal video games and don't count. Also, one of my favorite Pokemon games of all time. Those types of games are kind of working as intended. So let's just take a look at a few of the weirder games. Hey You Pikachu was definitely frustrating. But I'm pretty sure Pikachu is intentionally designed to come off as annoying and to ignore some of your commands. It was more of a role-playing experience you just interacted with sometimes. That being said, it was an expensive game that caused a lot of buyer's remorse back in the day. I've heard some pretty negative stuff about Pokemon Rumble U, but as you can probably guess, I've never played it. It came out in America like 5 months after the Japanese release, so a lot of us already knew it wasn't going to be worth it. And that's also the tough part, not having played every spin-off, especially the bad ones. But it's crazy to think that Rumble U's Pokemon figurines were essentially the original amiibo. It seems like it'd be more significant, but it's barely a blip in history. Also, those things are pretty damn expensive now. I've also heard some negative stuff about Pokemon Troze, but I don't know. It doesn't seem that terrible. The reviews were alright for a spin-off too. Pokemon Go? I don't know. It was kind of fun at release. Not really sure what it's like now though. Pokemon Unite? I did play it a little bit a couple years ago, but it's not really my cup of tea. It just seems like a standard game in that genre, and a lot of complaints are mostly about the greedy microtransactions and maybe some balance issue that peeve them. The one game I've seen that really seems genuinely pretty bad is Pokemon Dash. There seems to be an implication that it's meant for a younger audience. Apparently, the constant flicking of the stylus is kinda bad for your wrist. Sometimes, the game visually looks perfectly fine for a DS game, and other times, it looks like an ugly Game Gear game. The whole thing is rough, and I haven't seen a single person post about it in a positive way. Is this the worst Pokemon game? Well, it's certainly worse than all the mainline games. But picking a worst game is pretty freaking subjective. Man, is this the most negative video I've ever uploaded? I don't know, man. Play what you want, and if you think it's bad, don't play it. But we all know the worst Pokemon game is probably some browser flash game everyone forgot about, like from 20 years ago or something. But what do you guys think the worst Pokemon game is? I'm especially curious about the spin-offs. I feel like so many of you mentioned BDSP for mainline games in my first post. I kind of had to pin that one down, but it's all up to opinion. Video games really do feel more like a subjective form of media than others. Anyway, let me know your thoughts down below.